We're going to talk about the employment and wage data that's in SLEDS, and how to work with it. I mean, the sort of some of the keys are that it's UI wage data that's collected exclusively for administrative purposes. It is not collected for research. And it is not edited. So, there's employers submit it through a UI portal, and I'm not exactly sure what the edit checks are on it. I mean, it has to be of a certain quality because it has to meet the needs of UI. So there are some edit checks built into that portal. I don't know exactly what they are. And then that data is then linked to, so that's the individual record level data. So SSN level data. That data is then linked to QCEW, which is the edited firm level data. Okay, so basically all of the individual records are rolled together by firm. And that becomes what QCEW is then aggregated from. So QCEW is aggregated from those individual level records at the firm level, right? Into like industry and regional aggregations that we can publish. And those are edited. So at the firm level, we edit for industry and size. So when an employer submits weird data that maybe they're missing half their people, or they're not submitting everything, or they're not submitting every unit, we do see that in our QCEW editing process, and we do correct for that. So the QCEW is more accurate than the individual level wage records. And that's the data from which the industry code is applied in SLEDS. So the industry data comes from QCEW, and I believe the firm size, isn't there like a firm size variable? Let me see. Hold up. I'm gonna pull up the SLEDS data dictionary, sorry.
There is no firm size in UI wage records.
No, but there's firm size in QCEW, well, not the unaggregated individual level record QCEW. And what is in SLEDS? Let's see. Employment, organization, that's ownership code. Employment, hours, tenure, location, total. So location, total wages paid, and quarterly average employment. Oh, let's see. Is this at the firm level?
As I said, there is no firm size data in UI wage records, so it's not being shared with SLEDS.
So quarterly average employment in SLEDS is what?
That's the QCEW.
It's the QCEW variable.
Yeah.
And what is it? Like, what does it look like? What does it say?
It's the average. So for each quarter, it's the average of the monthly employment. And again, the monthly employment is the employment on the week of the 12th that each employer has, as you said, each employer has to report to UI the number of workers they have on the week of the 12th. So for each of the 3 months of the quarters, we compute the average, let's see, the average employment in that quarter.
For that firm?
For that firm.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to say. Sorry if it
Well,
didn't make sense.
yeah, and then to make things clearer, so maybe, it's better to say for the establishment,
Yeah.
because the firm could, it means the parent firm, which is like the likes of the Targets and the 3Ms and the Walmarts, which have multiple locations. So each location will have its own average employment. And for employers that basically just have one location in the state, then the word establishment or firm would mean the same thing.
Yep.
So can I ask, so it looks like the quarterly hours worked, quarterly wages, tenure, total wages paid, that is at an individual person level.
Correct.
And then the quarterly average employment is the size of the firm roughly that they're
Not-
working at?
The
Well, not the
establishment level.
size, not the size, just the location. It's
No,
where,
quarterly average employment is the number of employees in that establishment on a quarterly basis.
Right, so,
Average
number of employees, yeah, so
Yeah.
that's not at a person level, that's at that for that person, it's about their employer, not
So
about
that-
them individually.
Correct, and that is edited. That is edited data. The
Yeah.
rest of it is not.
Oh,
So
that's
this-
confusing though.
the SLEDS
Hey.
actually, yeah, so the
What are you gonna do?
SLEDS, yeah, the SLEDS is an individual, it's at the individual level, the employee level. And then, so each employee is matched to an establishment, to a location. Then what is added, so the information, let me back up, the information on each individual includes their identifier plus the number of hours worked during the quarter, their quarterly wages, the wages during the whole quarter,
Yep.
and then the tenure. And then the tenure is just how many quarters back they
Yep.
were, we were able to find them in wage detail at that location.
Yep.
Then we add to the individual data by location variables that actually now identify the employer. And those variables now are going to be the industry of the location, the average employment of the quarter of the location, the average, the total wages paid at that location, the geography. I think we have the longitudinal variable and latitude, I think,
Also
in there,
ownership code.
and the ownership code. So,
No,
so
sorry.
it's an individual. The data is actually at the individual level, but the match to the location, then we add demographics or variables that define that location to which that particular individual is attached. Does that make it clear?
It does, and I see in the label, when you go back to the other one, the label, it says employee, employee, and then it says employer. So
Yeah, yeah.
if somebody pays attention, it's there. I just want to make sure our data interpretation guide
Yeah.
is a little more clear about that, so.
And what Orion is trying to share with you is, so the first part of the data, which is at the individual level, that is actually, as they say, if you want to buy something, they usually say, as is. The data is literally as is.
Right.
And however, the rest of the variables in the SLEDS file, which define the employer, those are actually, my personal view, I call them the Bible, the Bible of LMI data, because they're really, our QCEW team spends a lot of work and a lot of time making sure, that the data is accurate as it can be. And again, as a simple exercise that Alicia and I usually do. So at a particular establishment, you want, because again, the wage detail will list all the employees that worked for that employer during the quarter, while the employment at the QCW is actually a snapshot at one time in each of the 3 months. So what we usually do is we add up all the SSNs at that location. Then we compare them to the average employment at that quarter. So, and as just a check mark or to flag some reporting at the wage record. If the wage record count of employees is greater or equal than the average employment computed by the QCEW, then we term that as it's valid, it's accurate, because again, since the wage detail is a census of everybody that worked at that location during the whole quarter, so we expect it to at least be equal to the average computed or derived from the QCEW. We raise a flag when we get the number of SSNs being less than the average employment computed from the QCEW. And then again, then we go into, okay, well, why is this happening? Is this because, well, first of all, is this a multi-establishment account? And if it is, then we ask the question, is it because maybe they reported some of their workers to another location? Or one common reporting that some of the multi-establishment firms do is that they will report all of their workers at all locations in one location. So in here, you're going to find that in some locations, the QCEW is saying that there is employment, while the wage record says there is zero employment. But if you bring, if you now collect all the jobs at that, I'm just going to pick a name. It doesn't mean that they do this. So I'm going to pick on Walmart. So let's say Walmart, in one location in Minneapolis, they report all of their jobs to that location. Then all of their other locations in the state will show zero jobs in wage detail. In other words, in SLEDS, you will not have any, there will be no SSNs in those other locations, while the QCEW will show that there is employment in each of those Walmart locations across the state. And so now, this is actually one of the major problems, in wage detail reporting and working with wage detail.
Yep.
Sorry, Orion, I'll stop.
Yes, no, that is a fantastic. Yes, thank you for saying that, Mustafa. That's probably that might be some of what Ty was asking about. Why are all these zero wages records in there? I don't know if there's some link there, Ty. Okay, Molly.
So how would you know in the SLEDS data that you are looking at a multi-establishment firm, and how would you, so say for example you wanted to look at tenure and you didn't want to focus just on location, you wanted to say like how long has a person been with Walmart no matter what location they've been at, how would you do that in the SLEDS data?
Well,
would you
well, first of all, I apologize. My voice is kind of, I have had a terrible cold this last couple of days.
We can hear you, Mustafa. I hear the cold though.
The only way to do that, Molly, is to actually first of all, and this is my advice to anybody that works with SLEDS data, is to first summarize the number of reporting units, by the average employment, by the data that is reported from the QCEW. Because that is, so for example, if you do that, back to my example of Walmart, you're going to see that Walmart, and again, I'm just going to throw a number, it has 100 establishments. And then, of course, you're going to find out that there will be the same number of establishments. And then also remember, these employers, when they report to these two different programs, the wage detail and then the QCEW, there are, in an ideal world, we would love that, or we would find that the number of establishments they report in one program matches the other program, and the number of jobs and total wages between the two programs would match. But this is actually the exception, not the rule. So you will find sometimes that even within those that are multi-establishments, for example, one employer might show in the QCEW 10 locations, while in wage detail, they will have 8. Okay. And the reason for that is because these employers, they will send their application, to be recognized as a business and to be liable for an employment insurance. And the QCEW will start to report them, or at least show them, and we will label them as pending. The QCEW labeled them as pending. So the QCEW has 3 levels or 3 definitions to it, or gives 3 definitions to establishments. Number 1 is pending, meaning that the business has already filed, but they don't have, at least to the QCEW, there are no jobs. Then active, meaning that the business or the location is already in business, they have jobs, they're paying UI taxes, they're paying their employee wages. And then the third definition is that the business is closed. And even when the business is closed, the QCEW, by directive from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we are required to carry them in the QCEW for at least a year, for at least 4 quarters. So even though, administratively, we show or we know that they closed or they have 0 employment, we still have to show them. So when you tally the number of establishments using the QCEW, that's going to, first of all, separate the single establishments from the multi-establishments. I like the single establishments because they're, the amount of issues is very little. It's, for example, you'll have maybe an employer will elect not to report hours, or or maybe in a particular quarter, the wages are 0. But those are, issues that we can handle. The more complicated one is when we're dealing with the multi-establishments. So there is no other way but just to, either run a query, or if you're using SAS, is to summarize the file, the quarter, for that quarter, and then just summarize it to the establishment level. Not the establishment, sorry, to the account level. And what I mean by that, Molly, the UI account. And then you want to count the number of reporting, the reporting unit, and then total up the average, the average employment. And then on the other side, from the SSNs, what you want is you want to now count and roll up. So counting across locations, then counting the number of locations that are there at that UI account, and then making sure that you're capturing the account where there is no jobs.
Oh,
'Cause
but
that's-
I'm not sure okay, can we hear from Alessia on how she deals with this? Because I'm not sure they have all the variables they need to do that, Mustafa.
No, all of this is from SLEDS.
This is all from SLEDS?
This is all from SLEDS. Yeah.
Okay, so Alessia, do you concur?
Yes, I concur. I'm using a different procedure to calculate tenure. So you want a tenure by industry, right, Molly? Is that, I forgot your question.
Yeah, so tenure by industry would be, I think, more straightforward, right? But if you wanted to do tenure by firm as opposed to tenure by establishment, like say somebody works for Walmart, but they change locations, or Target, but they change locations.
Yeah, so in order to do that, you have to fundamentally have all years since from the beginning of that account, and then do a procedure that does an automated count. Like for each quarter, you increase by 1 for that individual.
But I guess, like, even at a more simple level, like what variable would you use to be able to say there's two different like account numbers or establishment IDs here? How do I know those two establishment IDs are from the same, big firm?
It's a UI account that shows the firm.
So the
UI account, which is in this, it's not in this list.
Well, we need to add it to the data dictionary then.
Because
Yeah, because
code, right,
SLEDS calls it something different. So it calls it employer ID, something like that. And then there is the reporting unit ID.
Okay, we need to add
okay.
those. We need to add those to the data dictionary.
Yeah, if you go to employment organization, it should have it. Employment organization, that should have, no, that's ownership code.
Mhm.
Employment organization,
That
only
is
ownership
employment.
code, that's not correct.
No.
Okay,
we need
cool.
to add it. We need to add it. Okay,
Yeah,
note
so
to
it might
self.
not be, yeah, it might not be in the dictionary, but in the warehouse, the employment organization table has 4 or 5 fields: employment organization ID, account number, unit number, industry ID, and ownership code.
Yeah, so
Okay.
account number is what you need to identify the employer, and unit number is the establishment. So if you want to have tenure by employer, you look at account number, employer account number.
Okay, looks like Chandel just posted.
Yeah, that
I'm having a
screenshot
hard
has
time
the,
reading it, but yes.
it's got, the bottom part has a list of the fields in the employment organization table. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
the SLEDS data, the SLEDS employment data, the one that I'm drawing for Molly has this variable, Molly. So you will have it.
Yeah.
I named it UI account.
And Nora, she's drawing it, but I know we don't have the DSA signed yet, but she's not going to show it to Molly until the DSA is signed.
Okay. So this,
True that.
the link for that warehouse thing, that's not like, there's no version of that that's public to help people navigate the database, right? The
No,
only
we
public
need-
thing
we
we
need
have
to-
is still this data dictionary.
No,
Okay.
we need to get these variables into the SLEDS data dictionary. Those should all be available publicly here. Yes, yes.
We know how to do
Priority.
that now. We have documentation on that, and Casey can help if there's the capacity to go into SAS and make the changes on your end, Orion. Whoever's doing that, Casey can help.
I think
Yeah,
that
I
he
would
had
say
showed me
this
how to do it
very
in the
week.
past, but
Yeah, right now, like this very minute, they're in the process of the SAS transition. And so it's probably like the worst couple of weeks that you could pick to do something like this, but we can do this. And if we need to, we will do this. But I would say just be a little gracious with some of the timing.
yep, for sure. Okay, good. Good. Does that help with some of the background that's just not publicly available? Okay. Can we now go, let's see what we haven't talked about. Okay,
By the way,
so
just maybe a mention. I wonder if it's. Do we know? Is it like not in the dictionary because we often just don't? You often wouldn't give it out because like out of carefulness around identifying employers, for instance. Anyway, just maybe something to think about as far as.
I mean, it's definitely not public data, but the variable should be listed in the data
Mhm.
dictionary.
Got it.
And
Yeah,
it
it used to be there. I remember the
Oh.
previous version of the data dictionary had it.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Okay. Got it.
Okay. That's interesting. I didn't know that, but people can request it, right? I mean, it is private data.
Also our
So maybe the
wages.
reason it's not there is because people can't actually request it unless they have re-ID. I don't know. There's no way to de-identify an identifier.
Yeah,
Isn't
I
that
didn't mean
right?
to add any confusion. It's just right. If you're like giving out employer numbers or something, from SLEDS.
Or names. I mean,
Yeah, right.
if you give out a name and then an employment total, that's and an industry, those are both private. Those are both private data on that firm. So that's maybe why it was stripped out of the data dictionary. Okay,
Yeah,
we need to
probably,
think this
probably.
through. Yeah, we
Yeah,
need to think
I
this
would
through.
say timing wise, February 1st starts the kickoff for the spring load. And one of the first things in that, and if you can just let Casey and Cindy know it's coming, is the first thing they'll ask for is, are there any changes to any of the data being submitted to any of the files? And if this is, you're adding back in variables, then they will need to know about it so they can adjust accordingly. And then
Okay.
if we do that, it would be available for spring load, but you figure it out on your end first on, why it was in and then out and if it can be shared and all of those.
Well, Nora,
those
those
quick,
additional variables are in SLEDS. So those are being sent to SLEDS and they're populated. Those fields exist in the warehouse and they're populated. It's just a
and they're
question of what
still
to.
populated.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd have to look, but I mean, there's data in just like when I do select top 1,000 rows, but.
Oh, okay. Okay. So they shouldn't have to change any scripts to pull it in.
Right. It's just about like what is shown publicly in the data dictionary.
Okay.
So
Got it.
like if those variables were never going to be given out to any external researchers, then that could be relevant to just say, well, let's just not publish them, even though some of them might be needed for state agency analysis, for example. But just
Yes.
factors to consider. That's all.
Yep.
Yep.
We're gonna
Absolutely.
have to have I'm gonna schedule a meeting just on this to talk this through with like Nora, Steve, and some other people, because yeah. Because yeah, we need to talk about this.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
Yep. Can you make sure Casey is there? Somebody from the P20 team. Yeah, let's make sure Casey or somebody's there. So we're keeping them aware of what the questions are, whether we get it resolved, but they can fill in with technical stuff that we might need to know.
Yep. Okay.
And when is the next date for the next upload?
We can't submit anything until the master DSA is signed. So
I know,
that would be one
That's what I'm asking.
stumbling block.
Yes, so, yeah, right now we're waiting on deed. No pressure, guys.
I don't know. I don't think you're waiting on us, but maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, we are, I
Okay,
think.
I don't know
I'm
what
pretty
you're
sure we
waiting
are,
for,
but
so that's,
Yep,
we need to
but-
talk about that too.
yes, we do. I just got word from them and they needed a new deadline date from me since the end of the year passed. So that's fine. We're still working on that. It's still in progress, but we usually are the fall or the spring load. The kickoff starts February 1st. That just means like file changes, things like that. I don't think we need the data files until probably March 1st. I don't know the exact deadline, but somewhere in there.
Okay.
Okay, Mustafa and Alessia, what does it make sense to talk about next? I have some stuff that I know, we like Mustafa thinks about when using wage records. What is most relevant to SLEDS, Alessia and Mustafa?
Or maybe, Orion, if we can maybe let who's going to be using SLEDS in what type of research project, maybe share some of the, share some of their questions. Because I think the way, you deal with the data is actually dependent on the research question.
Yes. Here's a question from Ty. How should we be computing wages, pay, given all the missingness? I think what we just discussed is addressing that, Ty. Does that make sense to you? Are there other concerns you have that we might be able to address?
Yeah, I no, I think the conversation was really helpful. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, and we're already starting to talk about that, is just the documentation of these procedures, just so that because Chandel and I are working towards all the different questions that we have tasked in the SLEDS grant, and employment and wages will be at the forefront. And so part of my kind of anxiousness and anxiety regarding all this is just to make sure I don't contradict the great work that Alessia and Mustafa are already doing by using the wrong variables or interpreting it in different ways. And so that's why, with respect to the missingness question, it's like, yeah, if you both have procedures and how you deal or handle or the decisions that you make regarding that, that'd be really helpful. So.
I appreciate that, Ty. Nothing wrong with coming up with different results as long as we know why they're different. Yeah, but always appreciate reaching out to make sure that, if there's practices, et cetera, that we take those into account.
And not only results, I would add also methodology. I mean, there's no way, we don't want to hold you to what I and Alicia use or develop. I mean, if you come up with something that is better, more efficient, more accurate, yeah, we too will implement it. So it's a two-way street. Anyway, so on wages, it again depends on the research question. So I deal more with the overall working with the whole data set. So for example, I do research on minimum wage. I do research on the overall wage distribution, wage mobility. So in that, what I try to do, so for missingness, there are different approaches of dealing with it. The easiest or the simplest is actually to just ignore it. And when you're looking and when you research deal with the overall, like the wage distribution for the whole state, where we have, over 3 million observation. So if there is, 5% of it with missing wages, it's probably, the bias is what we call statistically, tolerable. While, like for Alicia's work, where she's actually researching or studying the wage mobility of students or new hires, then it becomes, the approach may be very different. And ignoring records because they have missing wages may, the bias in there may be serious. So I actually have two approaches. The first one is literally I can try to see how much of those missing wages, and in particular, when we say missing wages, where we have usually the wage record is very good. So when there is a zero wage, usually there is a couple of interpretations. One, it could be that that employee started at that location, and the employer reported a certain number of hours worked, but they report as zero wages. And the reason may be because the date in which they will cut the check is actually going to fall in, the next week or the next paycheck, which is going to fall in the next quarter. So this is not a problem when, for example, you're looking at an annual wage, you're looking at 4 quarters. These things will tend to complete or complement each other. Or the other thing that the employer, there is a separation. And again, you'll see that there is 0 hours, and then there are some wages being paid. And again, because the employer is actually not working, but there are wages that being paid in that quarter or being reported and showing in wage detail. So the first thing, what I do in the overall wages, I don't worry too much about them. The problem is because we have hours worked reported in wage detail, and some employers, for whatever reason, they choose to report 0 hours. And this is problematic, because if you want to, if you're studying and you're analyzing hourly wages, and now you're missing the hours, then that is that's a serious problem. Sometimes, what I'll do is I'll either impute these hours by either using the average hours worked, either by industry or overall or by region, depending on what what again the research is about. But in most cases, I literally just, consider the wage record as is, and then just a report that these analyses are about this certain percentage of the data that has complete hours. And then we've got this number or this percent of records that have or that show missing hours. I'm actually developing an approach which is to compute and using more advanced econometric approach in imputing hours and also in imputing jobs to locations where we have, as I said, remember the example of the Walmart? So if Walmart just sends all of their records to one location in wage detail, so we are now having missingness in the sense that we do not know where these jobs are. And then there is another type of missingness where we have the number of hours worked just being reported as zero. So I'm developing an econometric model that uses advanced statistics to impute both the number of hours. It's actually more comprehensive than that. Everything that is missing in, quote unquote, in SLEDS or in what I have my hands on, including demographics. So in that model, I impute age if it's missing, I impute gender if it's missing. This is the data that comes from DPS. Then from our side, even sometimes, the industry from the QCEW may be missing. And so whatever is missing from the QCEW, it also gets imputed. Then I get to the wage detail, and whatever is missing in it gets imputed. And hopefully, this project and the results of it will see the light sometime.
It's been a
Hopefully
long-term project.
before I die.
Before you retire, Mustafa. Okay. Molly. Yeah, I just don't know how that's ever going to make it into SLEDS, but I mean, maybe, I don't know. We'll see. Okay, Molly.
Okay, I have two questions. One is maybe less relevant, so feel free to punt it. The one is on the UI stuff. I don't know what all the rules are, but it seems odd that, like, do employers only have to report total wages to UI? Is that how? I thought UI depended on salaries, and so I don't know how you do that without wages, but that might be a separate thing. But then the other thing, maybe a more relevant question for the data is, I haven't looked at it yet, obviously, but are there kind of systematic differences in the missings? So for example, are there some industries that are just notoriously bad for having a lot of missings, or does it look actually relatively random?
That's an excellent question, Molly. And this also, I had to struggle with this because, in the theory of and the practice of imputation, the what we know about the missingness of the data is critical. And what's important is because we want to make sure that the missingness is random. And what I've noticed in the multi-establishments that don't break down their UI data by location is actually have been consistent throughout the years. And so, this is a serious drawback in the assumption of, in this imputation, in the modeling of imputation, making sure that the process, what the econometricians call the process that generates the data, is actually random. And, and I struggled with this a lot because we just have this set of employers that consistently do this. They just don't break. They don't send their UI data by location, period. And so, there is some of that. and I'm sure it will have some some impact on the results. And this is why, Orion, I did mention, because census uses our data, because we're actually the only state that reports ours, and we've got a very high reporting from employers by location. So they actually use our data as the benchmark to impute locations for all the other states where employers don't report by location. So Orion, this is why I wanted to see, if we can speak with them and see how they've dealt or they've thought about this, and I'm sure they did, and how they dealt with this issue in this theory of imputation, which is that the data does not seem to be generated from a random process.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, this goes to, the econometrics and how to fill in the missing data, and where does the missingness stem from, and is that process being random or not, and how does that impact the estimates. And and remember, these imputations, it's not only just a one, we're not only imputing one. I actually impute, I think, 100 replicate. So think about, I'm working for each quarterly of wage record for each 3 million or so records. I reproduce 100 replicates, from that one quarterly records. I hope I answered your question, Mai.
I just have one more question, but you can punt it if it's not relevant for SLEDS. But I guess this goes back to, I think, the comments we were making earlier about how data starts, in the wage detail from the UI reporting, and then there's further, aggregating and fact checking that happens at the QCEW stage. So, but like some of that maybe makes it into SLEDS, but very little. And so I guess my question is on the like the establishments you're talking about, specifically those multi-establishment firms. Is that problem also going to show up in QCW or no?
Because
No,
QCW
because
is
it gets
edited.
fixed.
Yeah,
Got
it gets fixed in QC. And QCW also works with these employers to put their data in
Fix it.
accurately. So,
Got it.
if they can convince them, they will convince them. But a lot of employers are just like, F you. You know what I mean? We're not going to do
Got
this
it.
because it's too much work or whatever. You know what I mean?
Got it. Thanks.
There's a lot of effort. That's a lot of what they do, is work with employers on that.
And so that's why,
from the start, like from the wage record side.
And
So
that-
am I right? Employers don't really use or get anything out of this. It's just a matter of reporting.
Well, they get their tax rate. They get their UI tax rate out of this, right? So, so it does matter to them because, it matters how many employees they have, what wages they're paying, and what industry they're in. That's how the tax rate is developed. And so some of what QCW does, and they give this back to UI, is say, oh, you're actually a construction firm, not a professional and business services firm, and therefore you have to be taxed like a seasonal industry rather than a permanent industry, right?
Mhm.
And so, so yes, it does affect their tax rate. And there are some incentives, but those get pretty much cleared up.
Okay.
And the QCW, and that's why I said in the beginning, the QCW is really, or our QCW is really very good, very accurate. There's a lot of work. And even, like, for example, when Alicia and I discover errors in wage records, and then we check them against the QCW, we actually share that with Chloe and the QCW team, and then they go back and then they try to figure out what's going on, and then they'll come back to us and say, yeah, I mean, we think that there is a mistake in wage records or and then they'll update the file. There is a question from Steve on the chat. This is actually my favorite research with wage detail is to work with annual wages, because annual wages is the cleanest way of using wage records, because it is safe from all of these other errors, in particular hours. So like, for example, let's say, a company does not report hours for all of their employees. For this type of question, I can still use them. We're not going to be, I will not exclude them. So, but I would, you're saying here, is it enough to simply add up the employee quarterly wages? Yes. And so,
Okay, great. Yeah.
Yeah, because that is, and the employee quarterly wages in UI wage records is actually very accurate. Why? Because again, that is what the our unemployment insurance cares about.
Yeah.
Yes, it's good to have hours, but we've talked to them a lot. They don't, they're not interested in them, because the UI is in the business of administrating unemployment insurance, and also paying UI benefits to people who file their claims. So and they do make a great deal of making sure that the wages reported in the wage records, at least for the claimants, are accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah,
will
so
say,
I'm thinking oh, sorry.
I'll just say the history of this. The only reason we have wages and location level reporting is because an LMI staffer went and became the deed legislative liaison and got this into a bill, and it got passed. So it was actually an LMI initiative, not a UI initiative. Okay, sorry, Steve.
Oh
And
yeah,
that was
no.
years ago.
Yeah, that's
Decades
interesting.
ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so I was just thinking I'm thinking about like some of the analysis that Ty might be doing. I think a lot of it is geared at looking at attaining a family sustaining wage. And so as long as we know, what threshold to use, and we're looking at hourly earnings, that's actually a pretty simple calculation in SLEDS. Actually, it's
Yes.
once it's if we're wanting to get into like hourly wages or something, that we have to deal with outliers and challenges around the hourly values, the hours values, it sounds like.
Yes. There is
Yeah.
only one caveat that I warn against. It's very important, because you want to make sure that the analysis covers a population that at least have wages, in what we're calling in this line of research, a year-round workers, meaning that the individual has worked the full 4 quarters of the year. And in order to do that, what we, people that use the wage records, around the nation, the way we define year-round workers, so you want to make sure that this individual is actually working in all 4 quarters of the year of analysis, plus a year prior, a quarter prior to the year or the first quarter of the year of analysis, and a year after the fourth quarter of the year of analysis. In other words, you want to consider workers who are in SLEDS for 6 quarters continuously, but you're only going to study the wages of the 4 quarters of the year. And
Okay.
then these workers will be defined as year-round workers. So this way, we'll guard against, like workers who are entering in late of the first quarter, maybe in March, or those who probably left the labor market in October or November in the fourth quarter, meaning that their wages in those quarters were lower than they should have been.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
will also say that Mustafa kind of is the one who did some groundbreaking research on how many jobs people have. Like the labor market is extremely dynamic. And so, people do have multiple jobs and people do jump from job to job, and it can be hard to distinguish between those two categories.
Yep. No, and I think it's really interesting. Even it was sounding so simple to do just the annual earnings, and I think it still is. And yet there are still factors, like Mustafa is pointing out, that should be taken into account, because otherwise you're going to be including somebody that just moved here, worked 1 quarter, and you're going to say, oh, they weren't earning a family sustaining amount in that year.
Yep,
And that's not
yep.
an accurate picture for that person,
Correct.
right? So that's a great
Correct.
point.
Yeah.
Correct. So that's that first point on that slide there. And it's obviously not fleshed out in any way, shape, or form, but that's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah.
And
I've seen that with other wage analysis. So like the Census Post-Secondary Employment Outcomes project that we contribute graduate data to is entirely limited to analyzing individuals, or the only wage and employment outcomes they show are for individuals that worked all 4 quarters in the year, just like you said.
And Alessia makes that distinction she tries to be very clear about that distinction in all of the analysis that she does. Are you talking about, full-time people, or are you talking about part-time or seasonal people?
Mm-hmm.
It makes a huge difference also in the wages that they're paid in general, like the hourly wage that they're paid in general.
Yeah.
Okay, so time check, it's 3. We only made it through basically 1 slide, and I don't even know, there's probably other things for us to talk about there. We didn't talk
We're
about
really bad at
linkages.
this.
Right, we didn't talk about linkages, and we didn't talk about potential ways to improve data quality. So do people want to, I suppose Alessia and I can stay, and probably Mustafa, do you want to continue this conversation today? Do you want me to schedule another meeting, or do you want to just wait until these things kind of bubble up to the surface and schedule a meeting then?
I would like to recommend that maybe, I'll be more than happy to answer questions once, a research question, is actually developed and someone is working on it, to answer questions related, to that research question, just like, what Steve has asked. And I'm sure, I think, and I don't know, maybe Alicia will also, be very happy to answer, such questions. I think that
Is
probably.
there a way to get that in some sort of a, knowledge base, or, frequently asked questions, some way to record that so it's there, so we don't have to keep asking you, new researchers don't have to keep asking you the same question?
I think that's what this recording is.
No, I mean going forward, as we go forward, like Mustafa said, if anyone has a research question, feel free to reach out. And I think that's great. But if that could be captured somehow and then added, that'd be better.
We'll probably should start, once these questions come, and then we'll answer them. Maybe we'll start documenting it.
That would be great. Yeah.
Yeah, because we have not as researchers, we just, we just carry the research and the thinking as the thoughts are coming.
I am well aware, being a researcher, that's why I'm also aware that it won't get captured if we
Yes,
if we don't say something. Yes.
That's how I I approach all my research. It's actually, it gets fermented in my head, and then I scratch paper and
Right. The documenting it afterwards is just painful and hard.
I know.
But important. Yeah, I get it. That's yes. But anyway, so I would just say let's leave it at, I strongly encourage you to either record those conversations or capture the question and the main like bullet points of the response somewhere where that we can all get at it.
Yeah,
Sure.
I wanted to type, but I can't apparently display and type at the same time. So I will try to capture some of that in this slide deck and then forward that out. And then we can, I don't know if there's some kind of training and learning section on the SLEDS website that I don't think there is, but maybe we can, I don't know
No,
where
but
you
maybe
want
on the
this to be
team
housed.
site or something there could be. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
If it would help, for specific examples, if we wanted to do a session where we dig through OHE's dual training grant analysis, because we use, quarterly wage records and hourly wages and have to, I've had questions for Alessia before about kind of how do you think about outliers on the low end and the high end, and she's been super helpful and suggestions because, like you say, it's project specific or context specific often. So, but anyway, if we wanted to, I'd be happy to just show that report and walk through the analysis steps, and you can, point out things we're doing wrong.
Could we get this
That's brave, Steve.
conversation maybe added to the quarterly SLEDS grant conversation meeting next week? Because maybe if we just took 15 minutes and talked, because it does seem like it's also relevant to the SLDS grant.
It is.
And I think all the people who would be interested, like many of the people who would be interested, would be somehow looped into that meeting.
Orion, why don't you suggest it as a agenda item to Lana?
To who?
She just sent out an email, Lana.
Oh, okay, good. Okay. Yep, I will do that.
Cool.
So no on scheduling another meeting for now.
There is, Orion, Alicia is asking on the chat. I also have a list of questions for MDE, if I can submit them.
Yeah, so this should be a back and forth. So that's, I think, something we should discuss at the SLDS grant meeting. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Alessia.
Yeah, and I think for any of the data that each of us SLEDS coordinators is point on from our agencies, happy to, like I can say for higher ed data, happy to do any of this as well if folks would like walkthroughs of what's there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Our follow-up is SLDS grant meeting for now.
Perfect.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
Okay. See
All
you
right,
then.
thanks everyone.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.